Even in places where your name has never been spoken aloud, your essence has already traveled ahead of you. While you've been tangled in silent doubt, unaware of your resonance, entire rooms have carried your presence without you ever stepping foot inside. Strangers have felt the echo of your being in subtle moments, in decisions they made differently because something about you lingered in their thoughts. There is a swelling tide of unseen confirmation gathering behind the veil. It won't come with fireworks, but with a quiet wave of undeniable realization. Everything that questioned your worth is about to be drowned out by evidence that was never meant to be hidden forever. What's unfolding is not random. It's a long-prepared unveiling of your impact, set into motion by forces far beyond your daily perception. 3 undercurrents have been moving at once. A distant observer quietly arranging a shift with your name at the center. An energetic impression left behind in professional spaces that continues to influence dynamics without your knowledge. And a reckoning, slow but precise, approaching those who underestimated you, while the ones you uplifted are being stirred to speak. The world is about to echo with proof you didn't even know was accumulating. The kindness that once felt unnoticed, the words you offered in passing, the effort you made when no one was watching, they have matured in silence, and now they return bearing stories. Stories of how you unknowingly steadied someone during collapse, of how your simple presence reminded others they weren't invisible. They've waited long enough. Now they come forward not because they owe you, but because the truth refuses to stay quiet any longer. What looked like a quiet confession turned out to be a signal flare for someone drowning in silence. Without intending to, a simple act of truth opened a doorway others had been too afraid to approach alone. That unfiltered moment became a map for the ones who had lost their sense of direction, showing them there was another way through the storm besides enduring it in the dark. Small gestures that once felt forgettable have become invisible scaffolding holding up entire lives. A glance filled with acknowledgement, a word that didn't pretend, a presence that stayed longer than politeness required. These weren't just kind, they were necessary. For some, they were the exact thread that kept the fabric from tearing apart completely. Elsewhere, unseen to you, lives are being reorganized around your impact. Drafted notes, unsent letters, and delayed calls pile up in the hearts of those who don't quite know how to thank someone who didn't even know they were saving lives. The moment is near when those voices will finally speak, not out of obligation, but because the truth has grown too large to keep caged in hesitation. You've become living proof that value is not determined by volume. The very lies meant to erase your significance are about to collapse under the weight of stories that contradict them. And those stories, they're coming with consequences. Not just emotional ones, but tangible, material ones that reconfigure what you believed possible for your future. A new path is forming under the feet of someone who's been quietly studying your rhythm. They've seen your patience, the way you carry weight without complaint, how you solve chaos with clarity. They're preparing to extend something real, an offer that doesn't insult your effort, but rewards it with more than just praise. Meanwhile, distant memories of you have started replaying in the minds of those who once dismissed your presence. Not out of nostalgia, but from realization. Conversations that once belittled you have shifted into questions like, "What were we thinking?" People who couldn't see you before are now using your absence to measure their current emptiness. And in a twist no one expected, the very voices that pushed you away are beginning to whisper your name again, this time with reverence, not resistance. Not because you're chasing them, but because the truth has found its own way back into the spaces where you once stood. And now, even silence is echoing your worth louder than applause ever could. There's a reason the whispers of doubt always reached you louder than the praise. Not because they outnumbered the truth, but because they were allowed to echo longer, to see if you'd still stand firm when the world gave you no applause. This wasn't punishment. It was preparation. Influence without self-possession collapses under pressure, and where you're headed, only those who know who they are survive the altitude. Those who tried to shrink you were never reacting to your flaws. They were responding to the magnitude of what they couldn't interpret. Places that treated your fire like a liability simply weren't built to handle the temperature you carry. But everything fragmented is now spiraling inward. Long-lost voices are drawing close. Recognition is no longer theoretical. It's walking toward you wearing the shape of sudden opportunity. What you called silence was actually the sound of spiritual balance being restored. Some of the same people whose paths you altered with presence alone are being stirred to repay that unseen debt. Not with forced gratitude, but with genuine gestures that clear the fog from your path. Words, resources, support. Real rewards for your invisible labor. The isolation wasn't evidence of rejection. It was insulation from the familiar mediocrity that once tried to convince you it was love. The gaps in your circle weren't failures. They were filters. You weren't too much. You were never meant to be tolerated. You were meant to be celebrated by a frequency that can finally hear you clearly. The very things you once tried to suppress, your odd timing, your precise emotions, your inexplicable knowing, are being recalibrated into currency. In a world that rewards sameness, your strangeness has become a signal flare for those starving for authenticity. What looked like weakness is showing up as a refined intuition only earned through endurance. New bonds are assembling like constellations, drawn together not by convenience, but by recognition. These aren't alliances formed from survival. They're connections forged by mutual evolution. The ones approaching now don't want to mold you, fix you, or benefit from you. They want to reflect you. Whenever light stirs, resistance is summoned. The forces that once tried to erase your presence were never attacking the person, but the potential. Lies weren't random. They were blueprints meant to collapse your belief in yourself before your impact could ignite others. But it's too late. You've already outlived the sabotage, and what's coming next isn't just restoration. It's retaliation by revelation. Every shift in the atmosphere around you was timed with precision, not to break you, but to reveal you. The resistance increased not because you were off track, but because your alignment was becoming impossible to ignore. Environments built on illusion began to distort under the weight of your clarity. What once went unnoticed now rattled cages, because your very stillness exposed what was no longer sustainable. Truth became your compass when others chose camouflage. And that terrified them. Those moments when chaos tried to drag you back into old wounds weren't accidental, they were tactical. Designed to keep your eyes locked on what once hurt instead of what now heals. Accusations weren't rooted in reality, but in fear of what you might activate by staying grounded. And though it all screamed for your retreat, you remained. Still choosing what is real, even when fantasy offered less friction. Still growing when shrinking would have earned you quicker approval. This kind of integrity doesn't go unnoticed, it gets tested. But now, after every invisible trial and private choosing, the stage is being reset. The season where unseen labor turns into undeniable fruit is beginning. Resources are adjusting to match your inner expansion. The spaces you'll soon inhabit will not require you to shrink or apologize. Relationships will no longer be endurance tests. They'll be amplifiers. Where you live, work, and connect will begin to echo the refined version of you that adversity sculpted. Your name has traveled farther than your footsteps. It lives in retellings of your strength, in whispered awe from those who misjudged you, in stories that now serve as examples of resilience. The ripples you left behind are forming waves of reflection in hearts that once didn't know how to hold you. Those who tried to define your limits from the outside are silently watching those boundaries collapse. But the deepest shift isn't happening in their perception. It's unfolding within your own. The voice that once waited for outside confirmation has finally become its own source of certainty. And that change, that's the real revolution. It was never that your radiance flickered. It was that the world wasn't yet ready to register its intensity. You've been moving through life with a quiet force that's only now becoming visible to your own awareness. This awakening is what activates the shift. Once you begin seeing yourself clearly, Everything around you starts adjusting itself accordingly. Circumstances lift, new doorways unlock, and unfamiliar faces recognize something in you they can't quite name but instinctively trust. Beneath the surface of your ordinary days, something extraordinary has been happening. The silent wishes you've made for others' safety, healing, and clarity have traveled farther than logic would ever allow. An exhausted parent felt the strength to keep going. A person on the edge found a reason to stay. Not because you touched them directly, but because something in your essence sent out a signal stronger than distance. Kindness has been your currency, spent without seeking return. Every time you chose patience when it was inconvenient, or love when judgment seemed justified, you added to a spiritual reserve that's been quietly compounding. That reservoir is about to burst, not as reward, but as recognition. What once felt like emotional weight is now revealing itself as rare equipment, tools forged through compassion, not applause. You've been absorbing currents most never feel. Suffering has passed through you, but didn't stay. It was transformed. And in doing so, you've become the kind of presence that can guide others through storms, not by preaching from safety, but by walking ahead with lived understanding. Your most difficult seasons weren't accidental. They were synchronized with moments when others needed proof that endurance was still possible. Without knowing it, your survival became a kind of signal flare, one seen not with the eyes, but with the soul. And those watching from afar have drawn courage from the fact that you didn't disappear when it got dark. Every betrayal carved out space for discernment. Every letdown trained your intuition to feel what words couldn't say. The reason your next connections will feel so different is because you're no longer mistaking noise for depth. Your love has been recalibrated. Now it seeks clarity, not chaos. And lack. Lack was never your enemy. It was a teacher dressed as a thief. Every hard decision, every moment where you stretched what little you had, has been training you to carry wealth with wisdom. The next time resources arrive, they won't confuse you. You'll hold them with the same reverence you gave to hope when hope was all you had. There's a reason you never crumbled when resources were low, because deep down, you were never meant to be owned by what you would one day master. Now that shift is underway. What's arriving isn't just provision, it's alignment. And this time, you're not meeting it as someone desperate to receive, but as someone ready to direct it with clarity and care. The delay wasn't punishment, it was calibration. The closing gap between where you stood and where you're meant to be is tightening faster than your doubts can keep up. Spaces that once echoed with absence are being redesigned for real companionship. The silence that used to sting is now making way for voices that carry truth, not performance. Departures you once mourned created open seats for souls with substance. Connections are coming not to fix you, but to match you, layer for layer, pace for pace. Even without knowing it, you've been giving off a kind of spiritual signal that reaches beyond the five senses. People on the verge of collapse have drifted into your orbit without explanation. Conversations that seemed random were actually detonations of hope for someone barely hanging on. Your essence has been functioning as a guidepost, rerouting people back to themselves using nothing but your natural being. There's a quiet technology in your presence, one that adjusts the emotional temperature of any space you enter. Your voice recalibrates what felt broken. Your expressions offer stability in moments when everything feels slippery. You've been moving through time like a subtle force field, gently shifting entire rooms into a better rhythm without even needing to speak. Those nudges you felt to turn left instead of right, to linger when logic said go, weren't meaningless. They were part of a much larger choreography. You've been following instructions that don't come from maps or plans, but from something far older and wiser. The seemingly minor choices you've made have formed bridges, triggered transformations, and rerouted destinies. And you did all of this while doubting yourself. Imagine what's about to unfold now that you're finally aware of what you've been carrying all along. It's not hesitation you've been battling. It's restraint woven into your soul for your own protection. The uncertainty that's trailed you wasn't a flaw, but a filter, designed to keep you grounded while your reach expanded quietly. If you had fully grasped your influence from the start, it might have distorted the intention behind it. The moments you second-guessed your worth were not evidence of weakness. They were safeguards preserving the clarity of your heart. The rise in resistance hasn't been random. It intensified precisely because something in you began breaking through limits that others rely on to stay hidden. The pushback wasn't personal. It was structural. The lies thrown at your name were meant to confuse the crowd before the spotlight could reach you. The emotional exhaustion wasn't coincidental. It was engineered to slow you down before momentum made you unstoppable. Ironically, the pressure didn't break you. It hardened your foundation. The very force meant to weaken your presence ended up fortifying it. You've been adjusting the emotional gravity of every room you've walked into, often without realizing it. Where tension once simmered, people softened. Where chaos hovered, direction returned. Not because you demanded it, but because you're being insisted on alignment. Workspaces didn't just improve, they transformed. You weren't hired to fit in, you were placed to shift the climate. Your habits became templates. Your boundaries became blueprints. Your standards spoke louder than any speech. Others watched, learned, and shifted, because your example made better seem possible again. This hasn't been random placement. It's been strategic placement. A live experiment, orchestrated in silence. You've been the variable that lifted outcomes across settings, relationships, and timelines. And now, the results are undeniable. The patterns show it clearly. Wherever you are, stagnation begins to move. Even in sleep, your spirit didn't stay idle. While your eyes closed, your essence reached out. There are those who woke calmer because you existed. Those who took one more step because your energy passed near. The unrest you felt at night wasn't meaningless. It was the afterglow of work done beyond the edges of physical time. And now, all of it is returning, measured not in minutes, but in miracles. The exhaustion you wake with isn't from lack of rest. It's the aftermath of unseen assignments carried out beyond the veil of ordinary life. The vivid glimpses of impact, expansion, and global reach that filter through your dreams haven't been fantasy. They're early signals, fragments of a reality already in motion. Your deeper self has been witnessing what your waking mind couldn't yet believe. The tension between doubt and vision hasn't held you back. It's been refining your readiness to carry the weight of what's coming. The ones who caused you pain weren't sent to destroy you. They were unwitting participants in a larger preparation. Their actions built the emotional calluses needed to withstand the scrutiny that walks hand in hand with influence. What felt like abandonment was actually exposure therapy for spiritual independence. Their inability to recognize your value became the training ground for you to anchor into worth that doesn't waver with others' opinions. The voids you once resented became sacred grounds for longing, and that longing shaped your capacity to receive depth when it arrives. The silence between relationships wasn't punishment, it was purification. When no one could translate your frequency, you turned inward, and discovered a divine dialogue that never needed human language. The deeper you sank into that space, the stronger your foundation became. What you gave away so freely, your grace, your compassion, your unwavering hope when cynicism was easy, did not vanish into the void. That extravagant kindness became a signal, received by intelligences far beyond human awareness. And now, those forces are coordinating repayment, not in transactional form, but in mirrored blessings that match the scale of what you've poured out. Closed doors weren't denials. They were recalibrations. What you called failure was redirection away from premature rewards that would have stunted your evolution. Delays were thresholds, not yet doors, ensuring that when you cross into what's meant for you, it fits not only your gifts, but your growth. Your example has been writing new definitions of integrity without using a single word. Children mimicked your compassion long before they understood its meaning. Elders felt acknowledged again because of your quiet gestures. Peers began raising their expectations, not from competition, but because your presence reminded them of possibility. There's no age that doesn't recognize truth when it's lived out loud. And you've been walking that truth, often alone, often unseen, while building invisible equity in realms that don't operate on money. Every time you said no to something that glittered but didn't align, you were investing in outcomes that can't be bought. And now, that unseen account is preparing to return more than interest. It's about to flood you with proof that nothing you gave was ever lost. You've been handing out relief in the form of laughter while carrying weights no one else could see. The way you ease tension with humor, the way you shift heavy rooms with a single offbeat remark. None of that was ever random. Behind those moments of levity lives a deeper assignment: emotional stabilization for people who don't know how to ask for help. You've been a walking reset button, restoring air to suffocating spaces without even knowing you were being used as a tool of renewal. Now, that invisible labor is coming back around in tangible ways that will stun you with their precision. You weren't asked to develop boundaries out of cruelty. You were shaped to withstand the impact of elevation. When your influence grows, so does the number of voices pretending to cheer while plotting extraction. That's why every disappointment had a lesson folded inside it. Every time someone took advantage of your kindness, it trained you in the fine art of discernment. You didn't become hard, you became clear. And now that clarity will serve as your compass in a world that will soon demand your energy in places you never thought you'd reach. The past isn't being erased, it's being restructured. All those plot lines that once read like tragedy are being edited into triumph. The heartbreaks weren't failures, they were directional shifts. The detours that stretched your patience weren't delays, they were realignments. The people who tried to diminish you played essential roles in helping you see just how unwavering you could become when everything tried to reduce you. What felt like collapse was actually the pressure needed to reshape your narrative. You're standing at the convergence of timelines that were always meant to collide. The whispers being exchanged in rooms you haven't entered yet are building something larger than recognition. They're constructing access. Opportunities that once felt out of reach are now searching for you by name. And those gifts you honed in the shadows? They've been sharpening into keys. Keys that unlock realities your former self never could have imagined holding. The solitude is ending, not because you've changed to fit in, but because the world is finally catching up to your frequency. Conversations are unfolding around your name, and the momentum is undeniable. The financial shifts you've sensed are tied to every lesson you've absorbed through restraint, sacrifice, and unshakable integrity. What once felt like survival will soon feel like overflow. You've always been the kind of presence that left marks on people's lives long after you exited the room. The messages, the gestures, the way you held space, it all lingered. Now, the ripples you created are circling back. But not just in recognition. This return comes in the form of strategic alignment, relational upgrade, and material expansion. You'll be shocked by how many people were touched by your existence while you thought no one noticed. The moment has arrived where hesitation must bow to embodiment. This is not the time to wonder if you're ready. The evidence has already declared you capable. The timelines have synchronized. The proof has assembled. The impact is recorded. Now all that remains is the step, the one that places you in full alignment with what's always been written, that you were never small, never forgotten, and never without purpose. The glow you're about to walk into isn't borrowed. It was earned.